Denise Bolser. In 198520, 4-year-old Denise Bolser lived with her husband in Manchester, New Hampshire on January 17, 1985. Denise vanished from her home without a trace. The only clue that was ever found was a note that was left behind, which read, "We've got your wife." A few days later, her abandoned truck was found at Logan International Airport. Inside the truck, authorities found her personal belongings, including her social security card, birth certificate, and local credit cards, which were carefully laid out on the front seat of the truck. However, she was nowhere to be found. The note that was found also did not provide any clues, and there was no ransom demands or any contact from the kidnappers. There were no suspects in the case, and Denise's husband was never pursued as a person of interest, and he divorced her in absentia. At first, police believed that Denise was probably kidnapped and possibly even murdered, but there was never any evidence to support this, other than the note. It wasn't until a co-worker of the firm she worked for was accused of embezzlement that police began to think that perhaps she ran away in fear. It was found that Denise herself may have been responsible for stealing $12,000 by falsifying books in her role as a bookkeeper. She was charged with her crimes in absentia in 1986. No new clues or tips would be found, and she remained missing. The case soon grew cold. Time after time, police sent dental records out to investigators and other parts of the country, wondering if this would be the time they could match the remains of some unidentified female corpse to Denise. But with no luck. Then in 2002, police would get a credible lead. Denise was soon tracked down and discovered to be living in Panama City. She had started a whole new family who had no idea about her past life. When questioned, Denise explained that she had embezzled around $100,000, and she had run when her ex-boss threatened her life. She also said that she lived in South Carolina, the Bahamas, California, and Hawaii during her absence. Denise had no idea she was wanted for embezzlement, and this is what brought authorities to her house. Authorities dropped the embezzlement case from 1993, as Denise's ex-boss was long dead. Kamiyah Mobley. On July 10, 1998 at 7, Tamara Mobley delivered a newborn baby named Kamiyah Mobley at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida. But 8 hours later, Kamiyah was abducted by an African-American woman who was impersonating a nurse. She reportedly was dressed in hospital attire and entered the room, assisted in converse with the mother, and later simply walked out of the room with Kamiyah in her arms. Employees initially believed that the woman who kidnapped Kamiyah was just a member of the Mobley family. After questioning the staff, police found out that the suspect waited in the hospital for 14 hours, repeatedly asking nurses when the baby would be leaving the nursery. She was in Shanara's hospital room periodically from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on July 10th, the day after Kamiyah's birth. The abductor told Shanara that there was a problem with Kamiyah's temperature at approximately 3 p.m. and said that she would return with the infant in about 20 minutes. She then walked out of the University Medical Center. With Kamiyah, neither she nor the child were seen again. The police believed the abductor was between 25 and 35 years old and possibly was wearing a pair of glasses and a wig. She was dressed in a floral blue smock and green scrub pants. She was carrying a large-sized black vinyl or leather bag. Authorities also believed that the abductor had knowledge of the center's building layout and was also familiar with medical terminology. Kamiyah's father, Craig Aiken, was in jail at the time of Kamiyah's disappearance. He was charged with lewd assault because when Kamiyah was conceived, Shanara was only 15 years old and unable to legally consent to sexual intercourse. Aiken was 19 when his daughter was abducted. Shannara had just turned 16. Shannara was awarded a $1.5 million settlement after settling a lawsuit against the former University Medical Center. She has since had 3 other children. Despite extensive searches, there were no leads or any suspects, and the case went cold then in 2017. A Zeal named Alexis Menzio had an inclination that she may have been kidnapped when she applied for a restaurant job and couldn't find her social security number. When Alexis demanded her social security number from her mother, Gloria Williams, the mother broke down and confessed that she had abducted Alexis when she was just a few hours old from a Florida maternity ward and raised her as her own. Alexis quietly pieced together the majority of her backstory by herself from Google and realized that her name was Kamiyah Mobley and her biological mother was Shannara Mobley. She once called her biological mother, but hung up when she heard Shannara's voice. According to court documents, investigators finally cracked the case based on 2 tips: a friend who said Gloria confessed to them, and an individual who claimed to have heard it from Alexis. The DNA sample from the teen was taken and submitted to a crime lab, where it was matched with the original newborn DNA taken the day Kamiyah was born. The test confirmed that the teen was, in fact, Kamiyah. Gloria Williams was arrested in January of 2017 on charges of kidnapping and interference with custody. She had a prior history with law enforcement, having previously been charged with check and welfare fraud. It was found that Williams had suffered a miscarriage about a week before she drove the 3 hours from South Carolina to Florida and abducted the baby Kamiyah. It is believed she then passed off Kamiyah as her own daughter to family and friends, who said they never suspected a thing. In February of 2017, Gloria pleaded guilty to kidnapping and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Kamiyah was then introduced to her biological parents. For the first time, however, Kamiyah continues to live in Gloria's house and says she looks forward to the day that she is released from prison and still refers to her as her mother. Arthur Jones was a husband and father of 3 who lived in Highland Park, Illinois. He was a commodities trader with a seat on the Chicago Board of Trade. On May 11, 1979, he told his wife that he had a sudden meeting to attend to, after which he rushed out the door. He would never come back to his wife and 3 kids. Detectives would later find that he abandoned his Buick near O'Hare International Airport with all of his belongings inside, but found no sign of him. Arthur's wife told police that he had been acting strangely in the days before his disappearance, and on the day he disappeared, he wasn't dressed for business when he left the house. Police would later find that, about 6 months before his disappearance, Jones lost his job at the Board of Trade as a commodities trader and had to sell his seat to pay for gambling debts in excess of $200,000. His wife told Highland Park investigators that, at one point, he lost $30,000 betting on a basketball game. Another time, Jones took out a second mortgage on their home, forging his wife's signature in the process to help fund his gambling. Moreover, his fellow commodities trader, Carl Gaimari, was recently murdered by 2 men wearing masks. This had impacted Arthur deeply, his wife said. She also said that later in 1979, they scheduled a holiday in California. In fact, they even bought plane tickets. However, Joan subsequently requested that they put off their trip for a week. His wife suspected that he was waiting for a payout of some kind. All of this information led police to believe that Arthur had certainly met with foul play. But as there was no evidence to support this, the case went cold. Arthur Jones was eventually declared legally dead. In 1986, his wife and children collected about $47,000 in Social Security benefits as a result. For decades, His case would remain unsolved until in 2011, the truth about Jones' disappearance would come out. Arthur was tracked down in Las Vegas after the Social Security Administration, acting on complaints from a man who said his Social Security number was being used by another, approached the Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles for help in locating him. Jones had been using a Social Security number that belonged to Clifton Goodnow, a former Waukegan resident. An investigation found that Arthur Jones was living under the name Joseph Richard Sandelli, and he had made stops in Florida and California before settling in Las Vegas, where he had been working as a sports bookie for the last 10 years. Arthur was arrested on 4 felony counts related to identity theft and fraud. Arthur told investigators that he had paid a friend in Chicago $800 for fake documents and a Social Security number belonging to another man, and had then left his wife and children to get a fresh start. Over the past 3 decades, Jones was arrested numerous times, using different names in Florida, California, and Nevada, according to investigators, who used his fingerprints to track his criminal history. Arthur was charged with fraud burglary, obtaining and using personal identifying information of another person, and possession of personal identifying information to establish false status or identity. Tamara Milograd. Tamara Milograd was a 15-year-old Australian girl from Melbourne. Tamara was the only girl amongst 3 children, with brothers named Eugene and Nick. On September 18, 1971, Tamara told her mother, Luba, that she was heading out to the Royal Melbourne Show with a friend from school. The Royal Melbourne Show has been going on since 1848, and there are thousands of people that show up to see the incredible sights and, more importantly, the rides and different forms of entertainment, which are usually on display for onlookers to enjoy. After reaching the show, Tamara and her friend got separated, as Tamara said she needed some change for the $5 Australian that she had in her pocket. This was the last time Tamara was seen. As time passed, her friend couldn't find her anywhere. She immediately notified her family, who reported her missing to the police. Despite extensive searches and police efforts, Tamara would not be found. Weeks, months, and years went by, but police could not find any evidence or leads to Tamara's whereabouts. Although the family refused to give up their search for Tamara, the police would find out that, at the time of her disappearance, Tamara, according to her relatives, had become a rebellious teenager and was actively pulling away from her family. She'd even had an argument with her family about her boyfriend, and it was so bad that Tamara told some of her friends that she wanted to start a new life. This led authorities to believe that Tamara had left of her own accord, but her parents and brothers refused to stop searching for her. There were a few unconfirmed sightings in the months following her disappearance, which gave the Milograd family some hope. One sighting was at the Tarmac Hotel in Laverton. Another witness claimed that Tamara had slept at the Royal Melbourne Show for 2 nights before leaving for St. Kilda and getting a job. Her mother, Luba, went to the areas that she was believed to have been seen, but came up empty-handed. According to Tamara's brother, Nick, they did whatever they could to be able to find her. He shared that they took trips across the interstate, searching for her, going on wild goose chases, even hiring a private investigator. But unfortunately, they did not get any closer to the truth. Over the years, the Milograd family prayed that Tamara would come back to them. Years would pass and the case would grow cold. 17 years after Tamara went missing, her father died, never knowing what had happened to his daughter. But on his deathbed, he had begged his family to never give up trying to find his only daughter. He also told his wife, Luba, to never stop searching. In 2010, the IFP's National Missing Person Coordination Center worked with the Milograd family to feature her case during the National Missing Persons Week. Then 44 years later in 2015, 39-year-old Karina Russell was searching on the internet when she came across the AFP's missing persons website. Karina had been searching for information about her mother, Pauline Tammy Russell, who had died in a car crash in June of 1976. Karina's father was also in the crash but survived. As Karina got older, she began to ask more and more questions about her mother, and finding only few answers, started investigating herself. Her digging would later reveal that her father and mother were never married, as Pauline was unable to obtain a birth certificate. It wouldn't be until 2015 when Karina, by chance, clicked on the AFP's missing persons website that she found a woman's profile who bore a striking resemblance to her mother. The profile she found was that of Tamara Milograd. Not only did Tamara look like her mother, but she also shared the same birthday and had a father named Alexander. Karina decided to get in touch with the National Missing Persons Coordination Center to try and see if the woman in the photo could be her very own mother. Following a DNA analysis, it was confirmed that Pauline and Tamara were the same person. And incredible, 44 years after Tamara had mysteriously disappeared, 90-year-old Lube would finally find out what happened to her daughter. Not only did Tamara walk away from her entire family, she had moved to another area in Victoria, changed her age from 15 to 18, changed her name to Pauline Tammy Russell, and had had 2 kids before tragically dying in a car crash. Luba, Eugene, and Nick would finally meet Tamara's daughter, along with their great-grandchildren, Marcia Honsch and Elizabeth Honsch. On September 28, 1995, New Britain police officers on patrol just after midnight spotted a sleeping bag behind the CT Beverage Mart in a shopping plaza on Hartford Road, just down the street from Corbin's Corner and the West Farms Mall. When they opened the sleeping bag, they found a young woman's body, wrapped in the blanket and in a plastic garbage bag. She had been killed with a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. Just 1 week later, the body of another woman was found 40 miles away in Talon State Forest in Massachusetts. She had also died from a gunshot wound. As days went by, police waited to receive a missing persons report, something that would help them identify the woman. Both victims had no identification on them, and all efforts to identify them failed. Investigators were able to lift a palm print from the plastic garbage bag that held one of the women, but unlike fingerprints, there was no database for palm prints, so the function of the print would only serve to match to an existing suspect. Detectives shared descriptions of the woman, along with photographs of their clothing, with the public in hopes of identifying them. They reviewed missing persons cases from across North America, but they had no luck and the case soon grew cold. In January of 2011, with the help of forensic testing, investigators were able to prove that the 2 bodies were mother and daughter. This led to the idea that the murders were not only linked, but likely carried out by the same killer, who was still at large. Even though police were able to determine that they were mother and daughter, they still did not know their identities. In 2001, 4 police officers in New York received a phone call from someone claiming that her relatives, Marcia and teenager Elizabeth Honsch, had gone missing 19 years earlier. The family had been looking for them without getting authorities involved. The caller told police that Marcia's husband, Robert Honsch, had told them that he, Marcia, and Elizabeth were moving to Australia to start a new life. The call prompted Massachusetts, New Britain, and New York investigators over a series of days to interview several relatives. Detectives took DNA samples from one relative to confirm a family connection to the 2 unidentified bodies. It was found that Honsch had never moved to Australia. He wound up in Ohio, where he met the woman that would become his bride, Cheryl Tyree, at a Christian truck stop. The two truckers married and settled in Dalton, Ohio. They went on to have 3 children. Cheryl did not want to change her last name to Honsch. So Robert changed his surname to Tyree. The name change made it difficult for Marsha's worried relatives to locate Robert Honsch through internet searches over the years. It was through Robert's brother and sister-in-law that the relatives searching for Marsha and Elizabeth finally connected with Cheryl. They communicated with Cheryl for several years. In one conversation, Cheryl conveyed that Robert had told her that he had no other marriages, no children, was an only child, and that his parents were dead. One relative spoke to Robert in November of 2013 about Marsha and Elizabeth. He told the relative that Marsha had met another man and took off, taking Elizabeth with her. When the relative probed deeper, Robert said that he had amnesia. In 2014, after the relative contacted the police, detectives questioned Honsch, and he said that something must have happened in 1995 to make him lose touch with all of his family, but he could not remember the event. He said there were a lot of things that he could not remember. Since 1995, investigators found that the palm print found at the crime scene matched Robert's. Authorities said that the examination items found near Elizabeth Honsch's body connected him to the scene. More evidence pushed authorities to finally arrest Robert Honsch for their murders in 2014. He was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole.